Namaskar and welcome to Chat with Rohan in conversation with Mr Jayant Sinha, Member of Parliament from Hazaribagh, Jharkhand and Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Finance. Namaskar and good morning, sir.
Namaskar, Rohan ji.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. Mr Sinha, speaking of this balanced approach that you've had to various things in life, everyone knows the man, the legend. Perhaps what they don't know is about your early formative years. You entered IIT Delhi at the young age of 17. That couldn't have been easy. What was going through your mind?
I was very fortunate that I was in the last 5-year batch in IIT. And so the IITs were going through a transition where they were going from a 5-year program to a 4-year program. So it was possible then to actually get in after the 11th. And so a number of people when I was at St. Columbus were taking the exam, and I said, well, why shouldn't I also take the exam? And I was a good student, so I took the exam, I got in, I was 17. And lo and behold, in 1980, I found myself in IIT Delhi as a result of that.
Mr. Sinha, not only did you study engineering at IIT Delhi, you subsequently went on to pursue energy studies at UPenn. What is your view on India's hydrogen economy today?
I was a chemical engineer when I was in IIT Delhi, and energy was a matter of great interest to me as well, because we had just gone through an oil crisis in the early 1980s. And so it was very clear to me that this was something that was vitally important for India, for our energy security and so on. So that's why I was very interested in energy. And that's the master's program that I did at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, as far as hydrogen and green hydrogen efforts are concerned, I think they are going to be very important for India, because there are many hard to abate sectors. So for example, if you're driving a large truck or if you're flying an airplane, it's very difficult to go to electric mobility there, to convert them into all electric, because the batteries will be too big. So that's where compact fuel cells running on green hydrogen. The Honorable Transport Minister Shri Nitin Gadkari ji recently came to Parliament in a green hydrogen car. So those are very interesting possibilities for green hydrogen, and more importantly, they will be non-polluting as far as our air is concerned. They'll decarbonize our transportation system, and they'll make India even more Atmanirbhar when it comes to fossil fuels. So for all of those reasons, we absolutely have to decarbonize our transportation, go to green hydrogen, go to electric. And my big headline, Rohanji, is net zero is net positive. So net zero for India is absolutely net positive. India has to go through a major green transformation. We have to decarbonize our technology. And if we go to net zero, not only will we build a more competitive economy, we will also deal with a lot of very chronic problems that we are dealing with, which is the import of fossil fuel, obviously the amount of air pollution that fossil fuels cause. So we absolutely have to decarbonize, we absolutely have to get to net zero.
Mr. Sinha, you pursued your MBA at Harvard Business School post-marriage. You've always been someone with intrinsic drive and laser-sharp focus. What made you pursue postgraduate qualification after marriage?
Well, everybody felt at that time that to really progress in business, you should have an MBA. Now it's a little bit different. My son has done an MBA, but he had a lot of second thoughts about whether he wanted to do it or not. But in my time, the idea was that particularly as an engineer, if you wanted to switch and get into business, you needed to have an MBA. And so that's why I decided to do the MBA. And I must say that I benefited a fantastic amount. Obviously, the education, the professors that you have, the new concepts that you learn for 2 years are fantastic in and of themselves. But I think what has stood with me through all these years, and it's been 30 years now since I did my MBA, is really the networks and the peer group that you're with. The wonderful people who are always there to support you and help you. And I think that community that you then belong to after you've done an MBA, that's very powerful and has a big impact on your life.
Mr. Sinha, you also come from a long line of administrators and policymakers. Your grandfather was an ICS officer. Your father was one of India's finest civil servants who then entered politics. What was the motivation behind you entering public life? It couldn't have been easy to give up a highly successful global career.
Exactly what you just said, Rohanji, which is that in my family there has been a long tradition of service. and people have served this country. You spoke about my grandfather and my father. My brother-in-law was in the foreign service. Many of my cousins have been in the foreign service or the IAS or other central services. And I have seen my family contribute to India's growth and development. And I reached a certain point in my professional life where I felt I had achieved quite a lot. And that I was very successful and could continue to be successful. But it was incumbent on me to serve the nation and to give back to the nation, because if people like myself who have the background and the skills don't serve the country will not progress as fast as it should. So I was absolutely inspired by the tradition of public service, the legacy of public service that exists in my family. And here's a question, Rohanji. A lot of people say, well, Jayant Sinha, dynastic, he's following his father. And there's a very simple answer to that, Rohanji. I think if you enter politics as a young person, where you don't have a professional career, where you don't necessarily acquire the professional skills, then yes, it can be construed as being dynastic. But in my case, I entered politics in 2014. I was 51 years old at that time. I'd already had a very long, almost a 30-year professional career. I had proven myself professionally. And if I came into politics at that time, it was not from a dynastic purpose, but to be able to take forward the legacy and to continue to serve the country. So I think you have to very carefully differentiate between dynasticism, which is people coming into politics just because that's what they see as an option, and people coming into public service, because you don't have to necessarily be in politics to serve the country. You can be in public service as well, or people coming into public service at a time when professionally they have achieved their goals. And there, of course, this is very much part of our own dharmic traditions, Rohanji, because first 25 years you're a student, next 25 years you're a householder, and exactly at 51, I became a Samaj Sevi. So in that sense, I'm absolutely following the traditions and the philosophies that are in our own ancient wisdom.
Speaking of peer groups, and not many people know this, but Mr. Sinha's team has to have lunch with him at the same table every day that they're working together. Have you always been inclusive in your outlook towards those you work with, and perhaps your detractors in Parliament?
Rohanji, we are all colleagues. We are all trying to achieve the same purpose, which is to make India a better country, a greater country, and humanity to prosper and humanity to do well. So we all share the same purpose. And so we absolutely have to collaborate, we have to work together, we have to respect each other, we have to give each other dignity. And the people who work on my team know, and this has been true of my professional life, where I had a reputation as somebody who was good at working with people, that I'm committed to their growth and development and their success. They know that I will always make the time for them. And whatever that I can find or whatever that I can do on my end to help them become better professionals, better human beings, I'm going to do that. So that's always been my thought. And hey, it's I think a formula that works, because if you have people better than you who are helping you and working for you, then you're going to benefit from that.
Not many people know this about you, but you've always been a problem solver at heart, and you've always believed in people who are problem solvers. And that's evidenced by the way that you run your team.
You're absolutely right. Throughout my career, as you know, I have done degrees and worked in institutions that really value analytical thinking, that value the fact that you have to understand the circumstances, assess what the real problem is that you're trying to solve, and then make sure that you have the solutions that will actually solve that problem. But there's another very important aspect to that, Rohanji, and that is you have to make sure that whatever solution you have actually works on the ground and continues to work. And so one of the very important lessons I've learned both in my professional life and in my political life is that you have to be able to monitor your progress as well. So once you have come up with a solution and you have implemented the solution, you have to make sure that you're collecting the right metrics and whatever bottlenecks or whatever issues that are coming up in the implementation are therefore surfaced and resolved. I'll give you an example of that. So when I became the aviation minister, we were getting a lot of complaints on a variety of things, that people were not getting refunds on their tickets, the baggage was being lost, there was poor customer service at the airports or in the airlines. And so we started a portal called Air Seva. It's still operational right now. People can still, of course, use it. They've been improving it since then. But with Air Seva, you could actually log in your complaints. And so we therefore started to find what was people's satisfaction with the air services that they were getting. And over time, we could see, is it going up, is it going down? And we could continue to work with the airlines to improve the real pain points, right? And so our goal was to have absolutely safe, affordable, and convenient airline services. So we came up with a solution to be able to collect the data, that was Air Seva, and then we could track our progress over time. So I think that is a good example of problem solving.
Mr. Sinha, not only did you work on Air Seva, you also launched Udan in your time as Civil Aviation Minister. Udega Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. You brought the capex required for private investors in the aviation sector down by allowing for leasing instead of buying aeroplanes. Do you think that in some sense set the ground for the reforms that we're seeing in the aviation sector today?
Well, we undertook a lot of the reforms, Rohanji, and Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik, Udan, was actually a word that we came up with. My team and I brainstormed and we came up with Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. And I think that program has been an enormous success. And that also is a good example of problem solving. Because when I came to the aviation ministry, the bureaucrats had put together an enormously complicated set of rules and regulations and guidelines as to how the regional connectivity service would be implemented. It was called Regional Connectivity Service at that time. And of course, we needed to understand whether this was something that the airlines would accept. And right on my desk was a letter from the airline saying, absolutely not, we will never accept the regional connectivity service. So the problem solving on that was to actually bring in the airlines, understand where their issues were, and then try and resolve those so that we could actually get Udan to work. And in fact, when the bureaucrats first presented to me the whole design, the rules, the regulations, the guidelines, at the end of it, I asked them a simple question, Rohanji. I asked them a question, I said, will the airlines make money on Udan? And they said, we don't know. I said, well, if they are not going to be profitable, why would they undertake Udan? They are not a charity, they are a company, they have shareholders, they have people who finance them. And so we then started to develop a series of spreadsheets to figure out how we could make Udan in such a way that it would be self-funding, it would not take any money from the government, but at the same time, it would be profitable for the airlines to do. And so we worked out a mechanism for doing that. And once we launched Udan, we found that yes, it was in fact going to be profitable for the airlines, and the airlines bid very aggressively on it and started up a whole host of new routes as a result of that. Very importantly, before that, Indigo, which is of course our largest airline, had said that they would only fly the A320, they would be an airline using only one plane. But after Udan and the opportunity that they saw in tier 3 cities, they actually started to use the ATRs as well, the turboprops also, and they placed a very big order, 50 planes for the ATR. So they actually changed their business model because they also then saw the potential of Udan. And here's the best part, Rohanji. The best part is that even when I was there, we went from 74 functional airports to 105 functional airports. So we increased the number of airports by 50% in less than 2 years of Udan. And now that number has crossed, I believe, 120. So Udan has been incredibly successful. Towns like Ludhiana, Bikaner, Dibrugarh, Jharsuguda, Darbhanga, these are the kinds of towns that people thought would never get connected through our aviation network. Now they are connected, and the number of flights is exploding in these cities. So it's a fantastic example of how you can unleash market forces to solve problems for the people, and you have to obviously create a collaborative platform with the airlines, the airports, and obviously government to make it possible.
Mr. Sinha, the aviation sector is not the only sector that you worked in to deliver connectivity to the last mile. in some sense, your work at the Ministry of Finance, specifically in terms of the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and Mobile Trinity, laid the groundwork for the next generation of financial inclusion in India. What many people don't know, that the current fintech ecosystem, all these startups that you see, are all based on the digital architecture that you set up through the JAM Trinity.
Well, Rohanji, I wouldn't say I set it up. I was just a very small cog in that wheel. The Honorable Prime Minister had this vision that he wanted to really expand financial inclusion, that everybody should have a bank account. That was absolutely his mission, and that's what we worked towards. He had, if you remember, announced on August 15, 2014 that everybody in India should have a bank account, and that we would do it by Republic Day. And the wonderful thing is that that was achieved before January 26th. In early January of 2015, we were able to make sure that everybody in India had a bank account. And once we made sure that everybody in India had a bank account, obviously then with Aadhaar and the mobile phone, this was the JAM Trinity, we were able to put together a platform that enabled us to provide benefits directly into people's bank accounts without any middlemen, without any leakage at all. And that, as you know, Rohanji, has been the bane of India's welfare delivery, where, you know, if you're providing benefits to people, whether it is into as cash, whether it is into food grains, however we provided, we've had these very big leakage problems. But now that we've built this incredible social security platform with bank accounts, with Aadhaar, obviously with the mobile phones, and tremendous bandwidth and connectivity for our financial institutions, even in the most rural areas. In Hazaribagh, I can tell you, even in the remotest villages, now we have very good internet connectivity, very good access to you know, the banking system. That has just led to an explosion of services, and obviously tremendous benefits to people because they're getting money directly into their accounts.
Mr. Sinha, speaking of your work at your constituency in Hazaribagh, I noticed the beautiful art in this room as I walked in. Would you like to share with us your work in terms of promoting and developing local tribal handicrafts in Jharkhand?
Rohanji, that has been a great passion of mine, that we promote and encourage all types of Indian art, particularly Indian folk art. Actually, there's another story attached to that, which is when I came into the aviation ministry, I found that when I flew around the country and went to all our airports, you couldn't tell whether you were in Chennai or whether you were in Dubai, right? You couldn't tell whether you were landing in a place like Bhubaneswar or whether you were landing in a place like Seoul, right? So our airports had the same kind of plain vanilla look that airports around the world have. And so I worked with the Airports Authority of India, and I worked with our private sector airports as well to say, why don't our airports really feature the local art of the region, so that when I land in Jammu, it feels like I'm landing in Jammu. That when I land in Ranchi, it feels like I'm landing in Ranchi. And now you can see in all of our airports, we've brought in a lot of local arts and crafts. And so these airports now are a reflection of the area and have a real sense of place attached to them. And that's not just in terms of, you know, just some paintings and so on. The design and the architecture of the terminals themselves reflect, you know, the local area, whether it's in Lucknow, whether it's in Agartala, whether it's in the new terminal in Chennai. You'll see that our terminals artistically are going to really reflect that sense of heritage and that local sense of place. And of course, you're seeing that I have this pata, which is Sohrahi art from Hazaribagh. Sohrahi art is a very ancient art. It was developed as a rock painting, and it is done with very local sort of ingredients, and it's something that has been nurtured over maybe 30,000-40,000 years. And it's a fantastic, beautiful, very artistic art form, and it's our job and it's our responsibility to encourage these local arts as much as possible. And so what I do is I always like to wear my Tashar silk and my Sohrahi art, so that people can see the beautiful and wonderful work that people around the country do.
Mr. Sinha, not many people know this, but I think we can share this with our viewers. I had the unique privilege of serving on your team right out of college, and when I was your intern, you had tasked me with conducting some research on the rehabilitation and resettlement of displaced tribal households in Jharkhand vis-a-vis the LARR Act. You've always been extremely passionate about tribal development and tribal issues. Would you like to share some of the initiatives that you're undertaking?
We absolutely have to reach out to those people that don't yet have access to the full range of modern services, that don't have full access to all the wonderful developments that are happening in India right now. And so I have focused specifically not just on tribals but on Dalits as well, to see whether we can provide them all of the educational and digital services that we have now developed. So as far as the tribal community is concerned, there are 2 or 3 things that I have really emphasized. One is that we have created and are in the process of putting together a Center for Tribal Studies at the Vinoba Bhave Vishwavidyalaya in Hazaribagh, which is the largest university in Jharkhand. And there is a wonderful building that's being built now. We were very fortunate that the Honorable Prime Minister was the one who laid the foundation stone for it. And so that building is coming up, and that will be the first center for tribal studies in all of Jharkhand. And it's modeled after the Center for Tribal Studies in Bhopal, which is quite a magnificent place. So we are trying to really ensure that tribal art and culture is protected, and that there is a place for scholars to actually do the research and understand how that culture has happened. The second very important thing that we're doing is that we are working, and we've almost achieved this, saturation coverage of the government's most important programs. So Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the Indradhanush vaccination program, Nal Se Jal, all of these important programs we are trying to pursue in saturation mode in particularly Adivasi villages, because they tend to be the remotest villages and the least developed. So that's another very important thing that I'm doing. And then the third thing I've done is that I have adopted 1 or 2 tribal villages, again because they are among the poorest parts of the Hazaribagh constituency, and we're trying to bring through my MP lads and so on all the necessary infrastructure, the social infrastructure that's required, like a Samudayak Bhavan, a community hall, for example. So that is our effort, is to really be able to ensure that even if you're in a remote village, you get the benefit of all of the public services that are being delivered, and also at the same time, celebrate and recognize the wonderful culture that has come for 50-60,000 years in our country.
Jayantji, you've always been passionate about bringing low quality, affordable healthcare to those who don't have access to even a basic hospital or perhaps a primary healthcare center. Your initiatives under Johar Jharkhand to bring quality, affordable healthcare to everyone at the last mile, make sure that ambulances are plying. Would you like to share us the inspiration?
Healthcare is a very big challenge for us. Honorable Prime Minister has the vision of Ayushman Bharat, wonderful vision, and it's made a huge difference. What we also have to do is to make sure that we reach the last mile as a result of that. And with Johar, of course, which is an NGO that operates in Hazaribagh and has done a lot of work, and other NGOs like Nav Bharat Jagrati Kendra, one of the things that we have emphasized is mobile health camps. So we've done lots and lots of health camps, again in remote villages, with the idea that just the basics, so that people can get their blood tested, they can get their blood pressure taken, they can take their sugar levels taken, they can have just a quick eye exam. So we provide those kinds of services through these health camps, and we found that the health camps are the cheapest and most efficient way of doing that. We'll get a couple of doctors in a medical van to go into the village, they'll set up there, and then they'll have typically in one day 300, 400, 500 people come and have them be examined. Then if need be, we'll give them the simple medicine, the antibiotics, the pain relievers, etc. That has worked extremely well, and we've really been able to raise the understanding of people about just basic things about blood pressure, about diabetes, etc. because so much of this is undiagnosed. So that's one effort, which is to be able to bring medical services to people even in remote areas. Of course, during the COVID pandemic, we did a lot of work. We distributed approximately 6 lakh masks, medical kits, free food during the COVID pandemic. We helped during the quarantining. So that was a very lengthy 2-year exercise. We built out the medical infrastructure. We put oxygen plants in many of in our district hospitals and in many of our subdivisions. So we significantly upgraded the healthcare infrastructure. We used the district mineral fund actually to hire nurses and doctors in certain health centers where there was no one there. So again, that was an effort to improve healthcare quality. But Rohanji, you know what I'm proudest of is the fact that I got the Hazaribagh Medical College started. And in my campaign in 2014, I had promised people that I would get them a medical college and a world-class hospital. And the medical college was inaugurated by Honorable Prime Minister, sir, and that has come up. We have 100 students every year that are graduating from the medical college, and the world-class hospital with 500 beds is also under construction. So we have developed over a 25-acre site, a medical complex in Hazaribagh, which I think is going to be among the top 2 or 3 medical centers in all of Jharkhand. And just to give you the context, the total number of doctors graduating in a year from Jharkhand was only 300. There were only 3 medical colleges in all of Jharkhand, in Ranchi, in Jamshedpur and Dhanbad, just 3 medical colleges. And so after I got elected in 2014, I worked with the then Chief Minister, Shri Raghuvar Das ji, so that we could open more medical colleges. Of course, we got Hazaribagh started, but we also got Dumka and Palamu started. And as a result of that, we went from 300 medical graduates a year to now 600 medical graduates a year. So we've doubled the number of doctors graduating in Jharkhand, and that is something that is sorely needed in Jharkhand. Right now, the number of doctors per people in Jharkhand is 1:8,000. So for every 8,000 people in Jharkhand, we have just 1 doctor. So there's a real shortage of doctors. The WHO guideline is 1 doctor per 1,000 people. So we need 8 times more doctors in Jharkhand. So to improve healthcare, which is what Honorable Prime Minister Sir really wants us to be able to do, we have to really build up the entire system.
Jayantji, you are someone who can be at equal ease speaking to your constituents in Hazaribagh, as well as someone like Mr. Bill Gates in New Delhi when he visits. What are your views on the transformational change that technology adoption can have for inclusive growth in India?
Technology is the key, Rohanji, right? What technology does is it enables people to get access to services that they would not be able to access any other way. And I spoke about the JAM Trinity earlier. With Ayushman Bharat, we're building up a digital health record for every single citizen in India. That is so important, right? So that people's blood pressure, their blood sugar can be tracked over time. If their diabetes is getting worse, then one can intervene much more quickly. So digital technologies give you massive scale, massive productivity. And the beauty of it is that we are very good at technology in India, right? So we built, I think, in the world, the best public digital infrastructure. Nobody else in the world has UPI the way we do. Nobody else has Aadhaar the way we do. Nobody else has the coverage of bank accounts that we do. So it's extraordinary, the public digital infrastructure that we have built in India. And now that it's been built, Rohanji, we can use it to leapfrog so many of the challenges that we have. So education is a big challenge for us. How do we make sure that we have good teachers in our classrooms, again in small remote villages? Now, if we can bring technology into the classroom, we can have a poor student be able to access through the internet, through a computer, a good teacher. And if that teacher can also be able to guide them and coach them at a personal level, then, you know, talented young people, even in villages, will be able to do well and thrive. So technology is a game changer in that regard. And I, of course, as an engineer, am a complete believer in technology. And so I have tried in all of my work as a public servant to ensure that we come up with really high quality, customized technological solutions to genuinely improve people's lives.
Jayantji, speaking of this extraordinary public digital infrastructure in India, do you think there is also scope for private innovation in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and what these new startups are seeking to do? Do you think that there is scope for regulation for it in India? What is the purpose that cryptocurrencies will serve in India?
Rohanji, the way that the public digital infrastructure in India is designed in such a way that where we need public goods, right? So for example, a payments platform, which is UPI. So those public goods have been delivered by a public digital infrastructure. And that really makes it very simple for people to innovate and build new solutions. So wherever we need public goods, that the state is delivering. Wherever we need private innovation and startups and other ways of really advancing new products and services. We have created the space for doing that. And that's the reason why India's startup ecosystem now is the third largest ecosystem in the world. And we have unicorns after unicorns. We have almost 100 unicorns in India right now. So I think we've got the blend between what should be public and what should be private actually very, very right in India. And that's why we are seeing this incredible growth in our startup ecosystem. And that's by design, Rohanji. It's not happened by accident. We worked on it over the last 8 years to really enable the startup ecosystem to take off, because that's India's future, right? So we are absolutely committed to that. Now, let's take the other question you asked, which is about crypto. Crypto, of course, has incredible potential, particularly when we come to DAOs, the distributed autonomous organizations. It's a very new and very exciting organizational form. It's the next wave of innovation. And of course, when it comes to blockchain technology, when it comes to DAOs, when it comes to crypto more broadly, we are wide open to experimentation, innovation, and so on. Now, when it specifically comes to crypto as an asset, there, of course, we have to be very thoughtful and careful about regulation and either enabling it or taxing it. And the reason for that is that there are some significant security threats that are associated with it. There's significant monetary stability issues that are associated with it. So we have to proceed carefully there, which is what we are doing. And at the same time, we have to wait till a global consensus emerges on exactly how these use cases, how these crypto virtual digital assets should work. And I think that's the very measured, thoughtful approach that the government is undertaking.
Mr. Sinha, as someone who has deep expertise in finance and the economy, do you think there is scope for a central bank digital currency and cryptocurrency to coexist in India?
We are definitely going to have a central bank digital currency. The Reserve Bank of India has announced this. The Honorable Finance Minister has announced it. And that will enable multiple use cases in a very efficient way. So for example, settlement and payments for global trade, right? So with the sovereign digital currency and with other sovereign digital currencies, those settlements and that trade becomes much, much easier, much more efficient. So that's a wonderful use case. Inward remittances may also become much, much cheaper because of a sovereign digital currency. So there are some wonderful use cases that come out of a central bank's currency, and not just our Reserve Bank of India, but various other central banks around the world, the US Fed, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, all of them are looking at digital currency. So that is happening. Now, with respect to crypto assets and the trading of crypto assets, as I said, we have some very important monetary stability, capital control, and security issues that we need to work through, which is exactly what the government is doing through its consultation process.
The national security implications that you mentioned, the fact that there are considerations which need to be had in terms of the evolving letter of law, the evolution of regulatory systems and frameworks for a country like India keeping pace with global technological innovations. Do you think that perhaps technological innovation sometime outpaces regulatory intervention?
Absolutely, Rohanji. That has always been the history of technology, because technology moves at its own speed. In many cases, it's driven by the underlying innovation or the physics of that innovation, and that can often be very exponential. That can often be completely non-linear. However, regulatory capacity is built up in a linear, incremental way, and so there's often a sort of a gap between where our regulations are and where the technology has gotten to. So that's why it takes time for regulations to catch up. But there is a very good reason for doing it in that thoughtful way, because the public interest also requires us to think about the risks, not just the rewards. And so there's always a balance between regulation and innovation. That has always been the case with technology, and it should be the case as well.
I'll share a small instance. You are a big sports fan. In fact, even when you're neck deep in work and you're analyzing all these frameworks, doing the MECE analysis that you so famously do, if there is a sports match on TV, you will sneak a glance.
I will absolutely sneak a glance, whether it's cricket or tennis. Those are my two really sort of important sports. I follow them very carefully. I have played tennis my whole life. I wish I could play more of it. I just simply don't have the time. I'm also quite fond of golf, but again, that just takes up way too much time. But cricket and tennis, I follow it passionately, and I'm always keeping up on the scores and how all the important players are doing. And I've been doing it as a child, since I was a child. I've always loved sporting statistics, so I follow the statistics also pretty closely.
Given your love for sports, Mr. Sinha, what are your views on gaming in India?
So again, gaming is one of those things where on the one hand it is very beneficial, it's very entertaining, and people can enjoy it a great deal. But on the other hand, there are also certain risks that you have to manage. We know that gaming can lead to certain types of addictions, and so we have to be careful to provide some caps or some ways in which people don't get sort of sucked into it too much. We also have to make sure that it doesn't become a way for people to do illicit gambling. So that also has to be protected. It shouldn't be used as a way to do money laundering, because that also is possible. So as long as we have the appropriate safeguards, and I think the global experience and the Indian experience is there, I think it's something that should work and must work. And yes, even in India, we have from the Mahabharata time a long history of people doing gaming.
Mr. Sinha, speaking of appropriate safeguards, do you feel that the letter of law needs to evolve with time?
Rohanji, the letter of law does evolve with time. I mean, think of the Puttaswamu case, which was in 2017, if I remember right, where the right to privacy became a fundamental right. The law has evolved in that regard. Even with data privacy, we are evolving the law. I mean, as a lawmaker, working on bills in Parliament and working on all kinds of legislative initiatives, we know that the law has to evolve. The law has to keep up with the times, and that's because of technology, it's because of changing circumstances, it's because laws become obsolete as well. So that's the idea of being a lawmaker, that's the idea of being in Parliament, where you have a chance to make our regulatory frameworks, our legal frameworks dynamic, forward-looking and enabling for people.
Mr. Sinha, speaking of your deep-rooted respect for culture, education and development at an early age, you mentioned India's demographic dividend. You mentioned the fact that our outcomes in education and health need to improve. If I may ask you, what is your vision for the role that the nation's youth will play in achieving a $10 trillion economy?
India's youth, Rohanji, and you and others of your age are the ones that have to do it. Our job is to support you. Our job is to be able to guide you where we can, give you the resources when you can, give you the connections when we can. But we have to support the young people of this country, because India is a very, very young country, right? Our median age is 23, 24. We have 450 million people who are under the age of 18. So we have a very, very young population. And that's a very exciting opportunity for India, because if we can take this very young workforce, educate them, equip them, and then give them productive jobs, they'll really grow the economy very, very quickly and bring prosperity to this country. But we have to make sure that the demographic dividend is appropriately utilized, that we are able to find productive work, and that we are able to enable you with technologies and other infrastructure, which is why the Honorable Prime Minister stresses infrastructure as much as he does, because we know that if we give our young people the infrastructure, the resources, empower them, they are certainly going to be able to innovate, they're certainly going to be able to take India forward. So that's the goal, to create that enabling framework for our young people, and then of course they'll build the great startups and come up as the great innovators.
Mr. Sinha, speaking about startups and innovation in India, the young like the internet, and the internet, unfortunately, is a very confusing place. What are your views on platform regulation in India?
That is a very deep subject that you brought up, Rohanji, and as you know, around the world, there is a lot of thinking that's emerging around the regulation of big tech. How do you regulate big tech? Privacy is one area, but then there's pro-competitive sort of things that need to be done. So we open up some of these big tech platforms and make it possible for people to compete on a fair level playing field. That too, there's a Digital Markets Act that the European Union is considering. The US is also looking at new ways of regulating big tech. So we also in India have to think very carefully about how we regulate big tech. It's not just about data, which of course we have done very deep work in. It's also about open access, it's about open markets, about a level playing field, because these platforms become near monopolists, right? So for example, there's lots of discussion about the App Store with Apple. Google's Play Store, should those be opened up? Should there be different payment systems? So those are examples of where we have to create a level playing field as well. And that is a matter for regulation. And the Competition Commission of India actually falls within the oversight of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance as well.
Mr. Sinha, speaking about big tech and potential regulation for it across areas such as competition, do you think there's a sense of confusion in terms of what social media in its essential form is? Is it media in the conventional sense of the term? Is it a marketplace to advertise? Or is it a marketplace for ideas?
It's all of the above, Rohanji, and I wouldn't call it confusion. I would just say that it's a very new form of communication for human beings. And like any fundamental technology, any new technology that comes up, there's going to be good things, positive things that are possible, and then there are negative things that are also possible. So again, it's back to what I was saying, you've got to balance regulation and innovation, and regulation has to evolve. As innovation happens, new ideas come up, new ways of doing things come up, the regulation also has to evolve. So for example, 5 years ago, nobody was talking about crypto. It just hadn't reached our consciousness, just wasn't that big. Now we've got to think very carefully about crypto, and crypto will keep evolving, so then our regulations have to keep evolving. That's why the policy making, that's why the parliamentary system, that's why our ministries, everybody has to stay abreast and understand these technologies.
Mr. Sinha, given the current global geopolitical climate in the world, what are your views on international trade for India from a bilateral versus a multilateral perspective?
Rohanji, we are going through a very difficult time geopolitically, and this does happen every 10 or 20 years. We find some major geopolitical crisis erupting. If you remember, there was 9/11 that led to the invasion of Afghanistan. Before that, we had the invasion of Iraq. So every 10 or 20 years, there is something geopolitically that really creates a lot of difficulties in global trade. However, that being said, the invasion of Ukraine and the clear alignment of Russia and China into one bloc, and then another bloc emerging with the Western nations, the European Union, Japan, the UK, and the US in another bloc, I think means that the era that we saw of globalization, where the world was becoming one sort of platform for trade and for investment, has ended. I genuinely believe that. I think we are now into a deglobalization phase where trade and capital and people flows that were very open are now going to end up being very sort of trapped in their various blocks. I think there will be one bloc which will be the Chinese-Russian bloc. There'll be another bloc which will be the Western bloc. India, of course, has taken a very thoughtful and balanced position between these two blocs. As a democracy, obviously we are against any violence, and even our dharmic traditions of ahimsa would suggest that we should absolutely not have any violence. Sovereignty is sacrosanct. Territorial integrity is sacrosanct. So we have to stay within the rules of international law, within the UN Charter for sure. At the same time, we also have to consider our national interests and make sure that those are not compromised in any way. So as a result of that, we have to, through this geopolitical crisis, navigate our way through it very carefully. But on the whole, global trade is going to come down. And you've seen we've just crossed $400 billion in exports, which is an incredible achievement under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister. And so we had been benefiting from global trade. That's going to come back somewhat, that we will find it more difficult. And so we will have to think very carefully. The flip side, Rohanji, and I'll conclude with this, the flip side is that India is very well positioned, and therefore new opportunities could open up for India. And again, like we have in so many other crises, whether it was COVID or even demonetization, the idea is that we have to take a situation and convert it into an opportunity. So as the world order completely changes, is there a way for India to rise to even more prominence and for India's exporters to find even bigger and better markets? So we have to use the geopolitical crisis to our advantage.
Mr. Sinha, India is a nation which has conventionally done very well in crises. In fact, India thrives in a crisis, and it's in no small way thanks to public leaders such as yourself. Given the constraints that India's tax to GDP ratio has, do you feel that the scope for taxing digital transactions and technologies in India will help?
We are taxing digital transactions, as you know, Rohanji, and of course there's now a global consensus around that, which is that if you are generating revenue and economic activity in a particular jurisdiction, then that jurisdiction has the right to tax, because that's where your revenues are coming from. So that principle is well accepted globally, and we are going to move towards more of a global taxation structure where digital transactions are taxed. And of course, with data localization and so on, we will have even more ability to be able to understand exactly what economic activity is being created and then being able to tax it. So yes, I think back to the earlier discussion we were having about deglobalization and so on, unfettered globalization, where you can just completely have data and capital flow across borders without any checks on it. That unfettered globalization, that period is ending. Countries, for very many good reasons, now that technology and trade has reached a certain level, have to create certain regulatory frameworks, certain taxation frameworks that will mean a different chapter on globalization.
Mr. Sinha, as someone who the nation's youth looks up to, what is your message for the nation's youth?
Message to all young people, Rohanji, is that we are in a very exciting age. I wish I was young now, and I could really take advantage of all these fantastic opportunities that are happening with technology, with the world being opened up the way it has been, with India becoming such a better, stronger country under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister. So it's a very exciting time for India, very, very exciting time for India. India is second to none now when it comes to our technology, when it comes to our science, when it comes to our infrastructure. We will continue to evolve and get better, but that combination, Rohanji, that we have in India of an ancient civilization, ancient traditions, at the same time a blessed, beautiful country, a young demographics, comfort with technology, great leadership, through our Honorable Prime Minister. That's a combination that very, very few other countries have, if any. So I think India is fantastically well positioned right now in the 21st century. Obviously, geopolitics is going to be confusing and difficult. But I can tell you, Rohanji, I grew up during the time of the Berlin Wall coming down and Soviet Union collapsing, and that was a time of tremendous geopolitical turbulence as well. We had the Gulf War of 1991, and who knew where any of that was going to go. So geopolitics will always be uncertain. There will always be difficult periods in geopolitics. But again, if you look at how India is positioned geopolitically, India is fantastically well positioned. Our people are young, they're driven, they're motivated. We have fantastic leadership, great leadership. And so, what I would say to young people is take the initiative, make this your country, make this your world.
Mr. Sinha, it's been a privilege to spend this morning in conversation with you. Thank you so very much for taking the time out.
Thank you very much, Rohanji. It was a pleasure for me as well.
Thank you.